So it appears for now that the COVID narratives are officially dead, as has been handed down to us by God Emperor Boris Johnson, who I do not actually consider God Emperor. Don't quote me on that one.
He deserves it for the day.
For the day, maybe. But it seems that there is good news coming, which is that in England, at least, all of the restrictions, and I mean all of them, are going to be lifted. So let's take a look at what's going on. So all coronavirus restrictions to lift in England. Here's Boris Johnson's plan for living with COVID. I thought I'd include this so we can get a more detailed rundown of what exactly is being pulled back. So all of England's coronavirus rules will be lifted later this week after Boris Johnson set out his plan for living with COVID, but without any restrictions on people's lives. The few COVID-19 laws remaining in England will soon be relaxed, including self-isolation, returning the country to the same levels of freedom enjoyed before the pandemic for the first time since lockdown began in March 2020.
Radical.
This is great. This is great news, but let's be perfectly honest. Who gave the government the right to take away all of those freedoms in the first place? I know that many can consider, at the beginning of the pandemic, it was kind of an unknown quantity, how dangerous COVID was. They had to make all of these statements and do these things to protect the public. But at the same time, past those initial few weeks, there's very, very little to do with a strong argument for supporting it going forwards. The more we learnt about COVID,
we just copied China because we didn't know what else to do.
Yes,
really.
And it's obviously the least British thing to do imaginable to take away the people's freedoms like that and maintain those powers and then reassert those powers a few months ago while laughing about it, despite the fact you knew the public didn't want that. But the changes are not UK-wide, with Wales and Scotland employing more cautious strategies, but Northern Ireland had already moved to lift all of its restrictions last week. All of England's coronavirus laws were due to expire on March 24th anyway. However, the Prime Minister announced 2 weeks ago at PMQs that encouraging data was allowing him to bring forward the date by a whole month. Mr. Johnson said the plan was about finally giving people back their freedom. How very gracious of him. After one of the most difficult periods in our country's history. Once again, my freedom was never yours to claim in the first place, Mr. Johnson. And also, we know from hearing about what's going on in Canada and places like that, that they've said, the people who are part of the World Economic Forum, such as yourself, have all said we know how to apply these rules to future pandemics like climate crisis or anything like that.
Wouldn't that be convenient?
Wouldn't that be convenient now that we've set up a system whereby the public is known to comply very easily with these sorts of measures as long as you infer it for the greater good, for your own good. So that's very convenient that we've got that set up now, and who knows when, I would say if, but it's when you're going to apply those rules again in the future. But so, what is with the living with COVID-19 plan? So, here are a few of the rules that are being pulled back. The rule to self-isolate after a positive coronavirus test will be lifted from Thursday. There will no longer be any requirement to self-isolate following a positive test for anyone in England, whether or not they have been vaccinated. The law will instead become guidance, with people being urged to act responsibly to reduce the spread of COVID-19. And isn't that incredible? Yeah. Now, after almost 2 years, only now are we being said, well, I'm sure you can take the responsibility into your own hands. I'm so glad you finally realised we all just grew up over these past 2 years. We're all finally functioning adults. But this is great because it means that if you're ill, you can just stick to your own judgment. Do I feel too ill to go into work today? Yes, then I'll stay at home. Do I not? Then great, I'll go into work. Free universal testing will end in England on April the 1st, and the contract tracing programme will stop from February 24th. So this is, of course, removing the ability for people to just get free tests. Which is fantastic because I would say the overabundance of testing is one of the things that freaked people out in the first place because you get lots of false positives through certain tests. I'm not going to say anything much further than that for just in case on YouTube and everything. But I think it will be good to stop subsidising people pathologizing their illnesses. How much will the tests cost moving forwards? So the government expects a market for lateral flow devices to develop once boxes are no longer available free on the NHS, with individual tests expected to cost a few pounds. Financial support as well through COVID will be removed. Self-isolation support payments will cease from Thursday, February the 24th. And from March 24th, the extra COVID provision on statutory sick pay, as well as the employment and support allowance, will also lift. And I think, some people may disagree with me on this. These are good things, because what we are doing is if you put in incentives for people to get maybe a little bit ill and then subsidize them for their potential hypochondria, whatever illness they may have, you're just going to encourage a work environment where people are taking as much time off as possible, because they know they can get away with it, and they know they won't get any final...
It's extremely open to abuse, especially as COVID, as the symptoms of COVID are so minor. You could literally just have a common cold and think, oh, you know what, I'll just give myself 10 days off. I best be safe. This has the potential to be really, really damaging socially and economically, and I think it's about time that we lifted it.
Absolutely. And of course, some of the opposition leader in particular, had some nasty things to say about this. So Labour leader Keir Starmer labelled Mr Johnson's living with COVID plan as a half-baked announcement from a government paralysed by chaos and incompetence. He criticised the removal of free testing, saying, if you're up 2-1 with 10 minutes to go, you don't sub off one of your best defenders, which is a complete nonsense analogy.
I don't get the analogy.
It doesn't really have anything to do with the situation. But also it's obvious that Starmer, being Labour, being a socialist, well, socialist adjacent, given that he's in Labour, you just want to maintain more government control, more larger government provisions, etc., and you can piss off, to be perfectly honest with that. He also said that the removal of financial support will hit the lowest paid and most insecure workers the hardest, to which I have to ask, will it? What's the evidence there?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Oh, yes, John said he's obviously trying to explain it in football terms.
Well, that just shows how effective that was.
Yeah, I know, but the question there is, will it actually hurt them the most? Because people who may be lowest paid and most insecure, they still have different choices. They still have options in a supposedly free society. If you can't work, if you literally can't work due to whatever disability or illness you have, you can still get on benefits. If you have a job, you can continue to work it, and maybe if you're just feeling a bit poorly one day, you can stick it out and work through it anyway to make sure that you get that pay. Or if you're ill often enough, you can still try and find a job that will provide sick pay for you that isn't just given by fiat by the government and is therefore not coming straight from my taxes.
Yeah, I have to be honest. I think he's clutching a little bit here, because if there's nothing legal to stop you from actually going to work, so if you have COVID, then surely in an economic sense at least, that's liberating for the working classes.
You would hope
Especially if you have a 0 hours contract, you literally get paid for the hours that you work.
You would hope so, but statist big government types want the public to be a commodity that they can move and shift at will, and keeping people financially dependent on the government is one way to commodify them.
It would interfere with that, wouldn't it?
It absolutely would. But as I was saying, there are options for people, barring the government treating them like their misbehaving stepchild. But people will just have to take their own decisions and their own responsibilities into their own hands, which is something I fully support. But it's not all smooth sailing, because there is also the question, what about new variants?
Oh, no.
Dear. England's Chief Medical Officer, Professor Chris Whitty, the illustrious Pope of Science himself, Chris Whitty, said it's likely that new variants will be identified, which will cause significant problems. We might have to shut you down for being too naughty again. I'm only hoping this doesn't
just accept your place in the pit of irrelevance. It's over. Yes. Go away.
This is making me think that this might turn into a eat out to help out situation, where the month after they're going, why did you do all of that eating out? That didn't help out at all.
No.
And you're grounded, young man, that sort of behaviour. He said, we need to be very careful about new variants, saying testing and tracing would need to be ramped up quickly if a new dangerous strain was found. Chief Scientific Advisor Patrick Vallance also said the virus is continuing to evolve, and it will continue to do so quite fast, probably for the next couple of years. Well, it's a good job that so many people are vaccinated against it then. And those who aren't vaccinated or refuse to get the boosters moving forwards are taking their own health into their own hands, which is absolutely their right to do so.
Yes.
And they should not be shut down for doing so. But the obvious implication there is, don't get too comfy with all of this freedom. They're more than happy to break out all of their responses, everything they've learned again, at a moment's notice. And when you're talking about people like Professor Chris Whitty and all of SAGE, to be fair, don't trust people who have a financial incentive to keep a problem going
100%.
to solve that problem.
100%.
How we've not learned this after time and time again at this point, I don't understand. But this all seems to have come about, as stated, because of the fact that things are looking better. The narratives themselves are being destroyed. And we've got a few examples of that from surprising sources. So we've got this Guardian article saying why one shot after a COVID-19 infection should suffice to be considered fully vaxxed, which in and of itself is quite impressive, a walk back from the whole 2 shots to be fully vaccinated and then indefinite boosters moving forwards. But would you like to see the original title of this article, which they changed?
Ooh.
It's time to consider natural immunity to COVID-19 as equal to 1 shot of the vaccine. That's right, natural immunity is a real thing now.
Oh, really?
We've only just discovered it, don't you know? It's an incredible admission coming from The Guardian, of all papers, as well. So the US Centers for CDC has failed to recognize that people with confirmed COVID infections, also known as natural immunity, have achieved some level of protection against subsequent infections and severe disease. Well, it's not like that's something that we knew happened with most diseases for most of recent history.
Yes.
It's shocking that we've only just rediscovered this. A recent CDC report for COVID in California that included the Delta wave, the cumulative hospitalization rate for the vaccinated was 0.7% among vaccinated and 0.3% unvaccinated with prior infection. So if you've been unvaccinated but had a prior infection, you are less likely to end up in hospital if you get it again. Notably, a 10-fold lower risk of subsequent infection was found in the people with natural immunity. And this is done through a survey that included 52,000 people. So that's a decent enough range of people to be testing on. Reinfections among those with natural immunity throughout the pandemic until the recent Omicron wave have been very low, less than 1%. A United Kingdom study of about 9,000 people with prior infections demonstrated higher than 90% protection against subsequent infections, even among those who had COVID-19 more than 18 months previously. This is something that if you'd said 2 years ago, hey, if I get infected, I'm probably going to have natural immunity to it, you would either be an anti-vaxxer or a conspiracy theorist.
Yes.
I'm sorry, the natural immune system that humans have developed through evolution is just a conspiracy.
Yes.
But no longer. The wool has been pulled from our eyes and we're allowed to talk about this stuff now.
Hooray.
Past critique of natural immunity protection is still relevant, though. Oh, it's The Guardian, so you can't let them be too good about it. These studies have survivor bias. They only include people who survived their infections. Wouldn't that be the same with people who got the vaccine and got infected and then still died?
Oh no, but that would be death bias. Can't have that.
We can't have that. We know that the symptoms of long COVID can be reduced by vaccines, which is an important added feature of the controlled vaccine approach. So that's a great job that we have all those vaccines and all of those people vaccinated, and people are still able to go and get vaccinated if they feel it's necessary.
Yes.
Wonderful, because none of the things that are rolling back is the actual vaccination program. They're still keeping that going. So if you do feel that you are needing to get vaccinated against the virus, you can go ahead. It's your free choice to do so, which is absolutely brilliant. It's now clearly overdue for the United States and the CDC to acknowledge natural immunity as partial path to protection, as has been previously done in several countries. For people with natural immunity, with proof of a positive PCR test, 1 shot is all that is necessary to be considered fully vaccinated. So maybe if we did have a bit more pushback from the media before now, these sorts of changes could have been enacted sooner, but they weren't. And if we want to just see a real clear example of the change in the narrative, we can see this excellent picture here. I don't know what Mother Jones is, but they've got a headline that kind of sums it up. If you just want to click on that for us, John, that'd be great. Thank you. Anti-vaxxers have a dangerous theory called natural immunity. Dangerous theory.
Dangerous theory.
Natural immunity.
We mean a natural
now it's
biological response
going mainstream.
to a virus.
Did you know that they've been talking about this for up to 20 years, maybe even longer than that? And then move along to the next image. Natural immunity superior to vaccines against Delta variant, CDC study finds, which is the one that The Guardian was quoting there. So I'm glad that we could finally make the common sense recognition of natural immunity being a thing. But there are still people who are very happy to live in their little authoritarian bubbles and want you to be scared, such as this Atlantic article. Mask mandates are illogical. So what? Once again, this is not the original title. This one was worse. It's not like The Guardian, where where they made the title worse. No, this one they made slightly better, because the original title, if we move along, Some mask mandates don't need to make sense. That's right, citizen. We don't need you to understand why we're forcing this boot onto your head.
So there's actually a religion surrounding mask mandates now.
I mean, if it wasn't obvious enough already.
Yeah, but they've actually just declared it.
Yes. Rachel Gutman says they only need to align with community's goals. And couldn't you just hear that in a German accent?
Yes.
They really do. It's purely collectivist framing. They just want individuals to go against their own better judgment for the good of the community, whether or not that makes sense. They want you to be brainwashed for the betterment of everyone. When the mayor of Washington, D.C. announced changes to the city's mask mandate last week, spit hit the fan. I guess that's some self-censorship right there. As of March 1st, district residents will need to cover up in order to attend school. And this is an article from a few days ago as well, by the way, so this is very recent. District residents will need to cover up in order to attend school, go to a library, or ride in a taxi, which honestly sounds awful. Move out of these big metropolitan blue state cities, for the love of God, if you haven't already. But gyms, sports arenas, concert venues, and houses of worship, all the places where people like to breathe hard or sing and shout in close proximity, will be facial free-for-alls. If the goal of mask policies is to reduce transmission of the coronavirus as much as possible, then DC's new rules are difficult to reason out. And you don't say. Honestly, you don't say. It doesn't make any sense. Well, I'm glad you finally picked up on that. Why should children, who are generally at low risk of severe disease, have to mask while sitting quietly in class when the more vulnerable elders can sing unmasked in church? It seems arbitrary, inconsistent, and absurd.
Yes.
One argument against mask mandates is that they don't actually change people's behaviour. People who would have masked anyway cover up. People don't want to wear a mask, wear theirs badly, ignore the rules. Anyone who has been at any sort of public location at any time during the pandemic recognises that mask mandates are not followed consistently, says an epidemiologist at Johns Hopkins University. But even disregarded mandates could affect people in other helpful ways. So it's that nudging. It's that nudging you into compliance that it's really all about. It's not about protecting you. It's not about keeping you healthy. It's about making you compliant.
It's about making a virtue out of conformity alone, isn't it?
It really is. From my perspective, the main benefit is not so much the masking itself, but the message to society that this wave is not yet over. A mask mandate may magically swaddle the faces of everyone in its jurisdiction, but it could remind already enthusiastic maskers to avoid large gatherings, or lead non-maskers to give the people around them a little more space. So it makes no sense on purpose, just so they can control you. This is Soviet levels of misinformation being pushed by the mainstream and the government.
I wish I could push back on that, but that is a true account of it. There is literally no reason to keep these mandates in place. It is just as a means of mobilisation.
This is Solzhenitsyn saying, we knew, they knew that we knew, and we knew that they knew that we knew.
Yes.
This is a circle where everybody knows that this is all a load of rubbish, not to go any further in terms of the actual efficacy of masks, more the application of them, but we're expected to go along with it anyway. It's ridiculous. Mask mandates are easier to enforce in highly controlled environments, such as schools. So you're just saying children are more susceptible to our brainwashing, so let's get them while they're young. Fantastic.
That's actually sick, given how dependent children are to pick up on facial recognition in order to actually stimulate both basic psychological responses.
It's ridiculous. And that's what's going on in America. Thank Christ I'm not over there. And if you are, once again, stay out of blue state metropolitan cities. They hate you. But it seems that this wave of freedom that England is experiencing might be moving to Scotland as well, as they remember that they're a bunch of freedom-loving Celts, or at least you would hope so. So Scotland is also looking to end all restrictions on the 21st of March. Scotland's legal COVID-19 restrictions, including the wearing of face coverings, will end on that date. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said people will still be advised to wear masks in shops and on public transport, but all legal restrictions on people and businesses will end as part of an effort to return to a normal way of life. Thank God. Meanwhile, the country's vaccine passport scheme will end on 28th of February, and we know how successful that was. Not at all. The plan is part of a new strategic framework the government has drawn up for dealing with the pandemic in the future. And like most government schemes, I hope it's the most useful a government can be, which is a big whiteboard that says do nothing. Because if governments just did nothing, we'd all be in a much better place as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, well, certainly if they act in the way that the Scottish Parliament has on this issue. Anyway, we need to talk about Russia, don't we?
I wasn't done, but I guess.
Do you want to round up?
Yeah, I was just going to say. Sturgeon said that it would seem. Scotland. I'm sorry. I was boring you so much, Thomas. It said it would be great to see Scotland move away from legal restrictions, relying instead on vaccines, treatments, and good public health behaviours. So even though that she was one of the ones like Starmer complaining about England moving the restrictions, she's going along with it anyway, which just says all you need to know about Scottish Parliament. But the main point I want to get across here is that even if this all does stick, the damage has already been done to people's businesses, people's relationships, people's lives, and they have the power in place now that they can reenact all of these policies at a moment's notice if they get enough people whipped up into a frenzy. So be cautious.
If you enjoyed that section from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to subscribe to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the premium hangouts we sometimes do, this one between Carl and John, on why woke remakes are absolutely awful. And if you want to follow Carl, you can also follow him on Getter at Carl Benjamin on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.